Everyone knows what tomorrow is, right? It's Reformation Day. Oh, you were thinking Halloween? Okay, it can be that too. Halloween is more fun, but Reformation Day might be more important. 499 years ago tomorrow, Martin Luther nailed his 95 theses, his 95 objections to the Catholic Church, to the door of a church in Wittenberg, Germany. Okay, so he didn't move there until a year later, after the theses were already in full circulation, thanks to the new printing press. But it's a good story, and we're going to stick with it. Luther was fed up with the Catholic Church and the way the church demanded and stood in the way of common folk and their God. Now, to be clear, the Catholic Church of today does none of what Luther was mad about. Luther intended to make changes in his beloved church and never wanted to create a schism. And eventually, the Catholic Church did change too. Luther was mad about having to pay indulgences or fines for every wrong. He wanted to partake in communion more often. He wanted the people to be able to sing God's praises, not just the priests. He wanted the regular folk to have access to the Bible. He floated his 95 grievances past a few church leaders, but they did not look kindly upon them. The 86th thesis is, why does the Pope, whose wealth today is greater than the wealth of the richest people, build the Basilica of St. Peter with the money of the poor believers rather than his own money? He really wasn't holding back. So as folklore has it, he nailed those points to the door of the church, and they caught on like wildfire. It took Luther's courage and determination, his fearlessness and gutsiness to get the attention of the church and for God to use him to get in there and shake things up. God really used Luther, and we can still be grateful to him that God made God's grace and mercy known even down to us. Elijah was one of God's first reformers. King Ahab was apparently the worst kind of leader. He was ruthless and oblivious to God's way and good works. He married Jezebel, and we won't get into why it was okay for the writers of this story to cast blame onto a female instead of the one who had the responsibility and authority, but they did, and Israel gets all messed up. God calls Elijah to turn things around. We see the story of God sending Elijah into the land where Jezebel is from, into a foreign land of folks who may or may not have heard of the God of Israel. The Lord of Israel has already made a drought, so they are beginning to hear about this God. The Lord sends Elijah to this foreign land and says that a widow will take care of him. Now, we've talked about widows in this society. They have no means, they cannot own land, they cannot work, and they have to rely on the gifts of others. So for God to say, go and find this widow and ask her for something is ridiculous from the start. But Elijah goes and he finds her, and she is done. She is distraught and ready to die. Elijah asks her for water and some food, and she is like, look, dude, whoever you are, I am gathering some sticks, maybe poisonous, I don't know, and my son and I are going to eat them and die. All I have left is a little meal and a couple drops of oil. It's not enough, and we are done. Feels like she's trying to say, go away all right so that I can die in peace because this drought has already killed me. Do notice how she begins her desperate plea. As the Lord your God lives. She's acknowledging the Lord. The God of Israel is alive and well and the one with power. She's heard of God somehow and know that God is in control. Then Elijah utters those 4 dreaded words of a messenger from God. Do not be afraid. You know, as soon as you hear that, you should really be afraid because God is about to move. God is going to do something big, and you might be a part of it, whether you like it or not. Elijah has the nerve, the audacity, the gall to ask of her her little bit of flour and oil. It seems he knows something this widow doesn't know. He says, "Afterwards make something for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of meal will not be emptied, the jug of oil will not fail until the day that the Lord sends rain on the earth." This widow is operating out of scarcity. She only sees what is right in front of her. And Elijah comes along and says, "It is enough. The Lord will make it enough. What you have will last until it rains. Do not lose hope." She does just as he says, and the Lord makes good on this promise. The meal and oil last for a long time, long enough for her son to get sick and be healed by Elijah. God provides for this widow, her son, and Elijah because they trust in God's lasting mercy and promise. Let us think for a second what this story is not about. It is not denying that folks in this world, or even in our city, are not legitimately hungry because they are. Elijah was not trying to refute that this woman was hungry. He's trying to change her outlook on what she does have. He's trying to shift her perspective on the little bit of meal and the little bit of oil. It is enough. She was looking at it as if it was running out, and Elijah was looking at it as if it was a blessing to be revered and utilized. God asks us over and over and over in Scripture to make this shift from a scarcity mindset to a lens of blessing and freedom. This is the beginning of Elijah's move to reform God's family. 7 of us this week spent some time with Jeffrey Brown, a community activist who single-handedly changed the cycle of violence in Boston. Look up his TED Talk if you haven't seen it, Jeffrey Brown. We'll try to send it out in the e-news this week. He's going all over the country now, telling people how to walk the streets, to get to know folks who are at risk for experiencing or perpetrating violence. And one of the questions he asked really caught me. He asked about the community's expectation of police officers. And my gut response was, well, of course their responsibility is to keep the community safe, to make sure no violence happens and that all are offered peace. I quickly realized that my assumption of what our police officers can do, even with a police force as terrific as ours, my assumption that they were the ones who were supposed to keep the peace was really off base. It's the whole community's responsibility to set the standards, to set the stage for peace. It's the community's responsibility to create an environment that quells violence. Yes, our police force is helpful in all of that, but it is not solely their responsibility to keep the calm. You all know that I think Rockford is a terrific place. I think that too often people are too harsh on this place. It's an amazing city to live, to work, to find fun things to do. This community is really great, but it's not great for everyone. There are a lot of folks in this community who are really hurting. There are too many people swirling in the cycle of poverty and violence. We don't have a King Ahaz to blame for these situations, but we do have a God who is calling us to be the next Elijahs, to shed light on the model of scarcity, and to show this city that there is enough. There is enough love. There is enough hope. There is enough peace for everyone who lives here. There can be enough jobs. There can be enough secure places to live and enough good, clean food to eat. There is enough. But we have a role in this reformation. God is still speaking, and God is saying to us, get out there. It's your turn. Your own folks are falling victim to poverty and violence, and now is the time to walk into their lives and make a new way. Jeffrey Brown's whole thing is walking the streets late at night and meeting with folks who are inclined to be violent, those who have been sucked into gangs, and those who are at risk of being sucked into gangs. And this whole premise hinges on one very important thing. We have to understand those kids as our kids. We have to believe with our whole heart that those are good kids caught up into bad situations. We have to think of these children as we do as our own children and grandchildren when they make a mistake. They are not the enemy. They are not the other. They are our own. Jeffrey Brown walks among our own night after night, and he earns their trust because he is not going anywhere. He was and is committed to reform. He tells this story about one night in Boston, the police come through and round up a bunch of folks who have warrants for fines they haven't paid. He sees them take this guy that he's been working closely with, and this guy has just gotten a job. He's really trying hard to avoid the gang activity, and Jeffrey knows that if they take this guy to jail, he's going to lose his job and be right back into the drug ring. So he approaches the police officer, who he knows because he's earned their right as well, and he's earned their trust as well. And he says, if I promise to bring that guy to court tomorrow to pay his fine, will you let him go? And the officer says, you can do that? Yes, I can, Jeffrey assures him. Okay, then. So the officer goes to the back of the big wagon and calls the guy's name and says, the preacher says he knows you and is going to bring you to court tomorrow instead. The guy's ecstatic, and all the rest of the guys in the wagon are like, hey, wait, preacher, you know me too. Reform starts with relationship. Reform starts with being willing to insert ourselves into a situation that is unknown, uncertain, and to just be. Elijah had direct instructions from God to go to that widow, but he did not know her. He probably didn't know at all what to say. She couldn't be more different than him, a destitute widow compared to a blessed, never-married prophet. But he went anyway, and he was bold enough to get into the middle of her situation and do what he could do what God was leading him to do to change it. Now, I am not suggesting that you take your small children or your walker and hang out at midnight in the middle of fairgrounds. Though, if you're feeling called to do that, come and see me and we'll get you trained up. I am saying that God is calling us to be reformers, always telling us that there is enough, always promising us a new way. Second First Church, as we discern our future, as we pray about our ministries and programs for 2017, we have to remember that our brothers and sisters are hurting and that we need to respond. We can do it. We are doing it. You have been doing it, and we need to continue God's good work in this great city. God provides the meal and oil and will use us for reform. It feels as if a prophet has come to us and said, do not be afraid. And to that, I pray we will respond, here we are. Send us.